Oh, Jake! Oh, okay.
Wonderful. Oh, look at you guys matching! Oh.
Gabby, did you buy those bars to get through this, did you?
Right then, guys. So we will crack on. We're already 10 minutes late. Apologies. I'll see if I can talk fast and make things up. I know. Tell me about it. It's my fault. I accept the responsibility. Sorry to let everyone down. Usual stuff. Yeah, it's okay. Never mind. We'll try again another day. So, nutrition. Who here's got any, sounds really thing, but any understanding of nutrition whatsoever? Doesn't matter if it's like, okay, I've done a little bit, I know what protein is, I know what fats are, carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Yes, no, maybe, yeah. Excellent. Base metabolic rate, anyone? No? Wonderful, maybe-ish, cool. Just stuff like that, so we've got a reasonable, Jess knows about food. Right. So what we'll do, we'll go, obviously if you guys have got any questions, just shout them out when you think of them, stick your hand up, rather than sort of waiting, because you might either forget it or chances are someone else is going to have a similar sort of question. So I'd rather you ask it there and then, than sort of leaving it for a little bit and forgetting it. Okay, we're going to start off going through macronutrients. So there are three main macronutrients. Basically these are things that we eat, so we consume. So we've got protein, carbs or carbohydrates, and fats. Everybody's familiar with those? Yes? Yeah, wonderful. So we'll start off with proteins. Proteins have 4 calories per gram in terms of energy. Is everyone familiar with the term calorie? Yeah? A calorie is a unit of energy, or what we use to use energy. So protein has 4 calories per gram. Some of this information is, to be honest, particularly useless if we are not going to calculate macronutrients, but it's just good information to be aware of as we go through. Okay, protein is the building blocks of our body. When we break it down into amino acids. There are 20 essential amino acids throughout our that make up food, but we need all of them. People who consume meat typically don't need to worry about it because you will get a complete amino acid break intake. If you are vegetarian, there's been more recent research has said that if you have sort of a varied diet in terms of what you take on board, then you don't need to worry about it. Some vegans may need to because their protein intake is a little bit more restricted unless they're taking on some things like beans, legumes, pulses and stuff like that, obviously because dairy contains quite a lot of protein as well. But it's just something to be aware of. Making sure you've got a nice varied diet generally is a good rule. I will also go off on tangents at some point, so I'm going to go back to this and just make sure I know roughly what I'm talking about. Yes, so protein, it's essential. We cannot live without protein. It's there for biochemical reactions, it's there for, it helps us with hormones, it creates hormones. It's what we need to aid muscle repair. Okay? So if you don't take on protein, then it's going to be really hard to recover from stuff like training. Yeah. Yes, it can provide energy as well, but we don't want to get to a point where it provides energy because that means we've depleted our glycogen stores, we've utilised all of our body fat that is available. Essentially, once we hit that point, that's an emergency station where we need to stop doing whatever we're doing. We need to start taking on board. That's generally when we've either gone through extreme workouts, there are super extreme situations, if you've been in starvation for 4 days. But hopefully, no one here will ever achieve that. I try my best, but no one here will ever hit that point. Okay? Again, we're just going to go over a really quick overview of macronutrients. Don't want to go into too much detail about sort of the ins and outs of them because it doesn't really make too much difference as to what you take on board as such. Okay? So there's proteins. Carbohydrates, exactly the same. They have 4 calories per gram. Everybody's aware of carbohydrates? Yes, 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 wonderful. Carbohydrates are the easiest form of energy available. Talk to that a little bit quicker, so I'll come through all these. Got exercise, this is interactive, so we're going to be breaking up into groups and talking about shit as well. I know, we have to interact with people.
Really?
Yeah, sorry. I know. Michael, if you let me know, I can separate you back. Okay, carbohydrates. Their key function is to provide energy. That's it. Where carbohydrates, when broken down into the most simple form, are glucose. Glucose is the easiest thing to utilise to basically produce energy. We then store glucose, we break down glucose into glycogen and we store it in our liver and in our muscles. We can store roughly 100 grams of glycogen in our liver, and depending on the person, sort of size, age, weight, height, all of those sorts of different factors, people can store up to about 500 grams or an average 500 grams of glycogen inside your muscle tissue as well. Again, completely irrelevant, but it's nice just to have a bit of a background. No one's ever going to ask you sort of what's it, oh, this pasta is going to give you 300 grams of glycogen, but these muscles are 500 grams.
If they do.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just going to go through the breakdown in a minute. And so, have people heard of stuff like insulin and glucagon? Yes, no, yes, give me something. Yes, thank you. Wonderful. So insulin and glucagon are two hormones that regulate blood sugar. Okay, so when we go down carbohydrates, broken into sugar, so glucose. And this generally happens around mealtime. So obviously we have a glucose spike in our blood sugar when we consume food. This spike can be impacted by what's in the meal. So in terms of the glycemic index, glycemic index is a numerical value on how a certain food impacts your blood sugar. The higher the number, the more it impacts your blood sugar. Okay, so things like chocolate bars, sweets, going to have a faster impact on your blood sugar. They're going to give you a faster spike in your blood sugar than stuff like oats, rice, grains, stuff that takes a little bit longer to digest. So it's broken down into glucose. Our pancreas then secretes insulin, and then it gets stored as glycogen in our muscles. So we go from here. So the pancreas will secrete insulin that then regulates our blood sugar levels and helps us produce glycogen. Then we then store that glycogen as in our muscles, or in our liver and in our muscle tissue. Once those stores are full, we then begin to start storing any additional glucose as triglycerides. So triglyceride is another term for fat, and this is then stored as body fat. So this is where we start to get that additional intake, those additional calories that we don't need, are then stored as body fat. So this is where an overconsumption of calories leads to that imbalance of energy, why we then start to store body fat. Okay, we'll cover this a little more later in terms of total daily energy expenditure when we go through sort of eating for fat loss. But that's just something to bear in mind. So when we take on an overconsumption of carbs, and we then have an imbalance, so we store that. Okay. We then start to deplete these stores first, because glucose is the easiest form of energy and the most readily available. We require it in our brain, also uses it as the primary source of energy. We then release glucagon. Well, the pancreas releases glucagon when it detects a decrease in blood sugar. So glucagon is another hormone. And what hormone is made out of? Yes, good, excellent. We have people listening. Glucagon, and then takes us back. Really bad arrows. Takes us back to glucose. Yeah. Okay. So we see that sort of cycle. Exercise can increase insulin sensitivity, so we're able to manage our blood sugar levels a little bit better. But again, little further on that. So it's one of the reasons that we exercise. One of the many reasons we come and take part in this shit we call CrossFit. Yeah? Excellent, wonderful. If I'm going too fast, please shout at me to slow down. But, so we go through that. Another form of carbohydrates that isn't broken down. So obviously, carbs are broken into glucose. But then we have something called dietary fiber. So this is where you see there's marketing strategies in some of the protein bars. So Grenade did it really well when they were like, oh, there's only 2 grams of carbohydrates. There's not. There's 2 grams of carbohydrates broken down into glucose. They don't include dietary fiber in their marketing. So there's actually more carbohydrates in there. It's only because we don't absorb fiber. Fiber is responsible for our gut health and health of our intestinal tract, that they don't actually include that in their marketing. So don't believe that hype on there. It's all marketing when they say there's no sugar in it or no carbohydrates, okay? But dietary fiber, these are seen in lower glycemic index foods. So oats, rice, pasta, breads. When we come into this helps improve our gut health. So this makes our poop more solid. Okay? Who's giggled at poop? We're going to be talking about whole heat more, don't you worry. Poop's just the start. Okay? So if you get the soft fleshy parts of fruit as well, also you get fibre in there. Okay, so we need to make sure we've got fibre in our diet as well for our gut health. Okay. Back to this. Wonderful. So we'll go to fats as well, and then we'll come back in a second. Fats, 9 calories per gram. So you can see that this is over double the energies per gram, or just double the energy units per gram of carbohydrates and protein. Okay? So this is why it's more dense. Fatty foods are always higher in calories because we see 9 calories per gram. So you get 100 calories of food high in fat, or 100 calories of food high in fibre, or carbohydrates, and the volume is drastically different. Okay? And then we'll come to talk about food volume a little bit later on. Fats, however, are essential. We have saturated fat, we have unsaturated fat. There is no bad type of fat. Okay? So again, exactly the same when you see companies marketing stuff about taking away bad fats. It's not. It's due to an imbalance in the ratio. So we have to have some saturated fat in our diet because saturated fat is responsible for transporting cholesterol to sites that is required. Unsaturated fat is then responsible for taking away cholesterol. So when people say bad fats, it's not, it means we have too much saturated fat in our diet, which generally comes from animal sources. And that means that we have deposits of cholesterol within our blood. So we then start to have fatty buildups within our bloodstream. It causes high blood pressure. Or can be a contributor to high blood pressure, sorry. So this is why we need to increase our level of unsaturated fats. These typically come from plants. So these are generally more typically liquid at room temperature, and then saturated fats are typically more solid at room temperature. That's a good way to just eyeballing things. Have a look at it. Okay. But fats are essential. We need fats in our diet. There are also certain fats soluble vitamins. Vitamins A, D, E, and K. We cannot take those on board if we don't eat fat. So it's really, really important to make sure we have a good variety of fats in our diet. One of the things we're going to see across the board is a lot of variety. Okay. So I've mentioned saturated and unsaturated fats. There's also omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. This is something typically because of especially in a Western diet, we have a diet high in grains, and these can elevate the number of omega-6 fatty acids in our diet. Omega-6 are typically more inflammatory than omega-3. So omega-3 comes from fish, super high in omega-3. Avocados have a little bit of omega-3, but again, typically fish oils is what we should be looking for. this is where we'll come to supplements a little bit later on, but you want to be having portions of omega-3 rich foods in your diet so that we can elevate that and it has an anti-inflammatory response. Anti-inflammatory. So inflammation is a really interesting. There's interesting books on the inflammatory diet inflammation, but inflammation is a natural process in your body to aid healing, but also we want to reduce any unnecessary inflammation. So inflammation happens when there's an injury, when you get swelling, when you get edema. So if you go over on your ankle and your body, you get swelling around that area, that's a response to promote healing, but also to stop you from doing any further damage, because that swelling will limit the range of motion. So it's like your body's protective response. But we can also gain inflammation in various parts through stress. We can, in reaction to certain foods. So certain people, they're not allergic to certain foods, but they get an inflammatory response. So dairy in some people can cause an inflammatory response in their respiratory system. So you get mucus, or you increase levels of mucus. Right? Certain people have it. And again, particularly around so for me, hay fever season, I can notice it a little bit more. Take on dairy, then suffering from hay fever symptoms, then it just makes it a little bit worse. Some people get it through other different foods, so grains, eggs, there's all different sorts of things. But don't get too hung up on inflammatory. Some people push an inflammatory diet, and certainly one thing that I work with a lot is that people have tried various different diets, and by diets I mean sort of cut out certain things. So the keto diet, for example, cuts out all carbohydrates. And then variation of there's the Atkins diet, and there's carnivore diet, there's paleo. All of these things work on restricting or cutting out different foods. Two things that I'll touch on this again a little bit later, but two things. Everyone has a diet. Your diet is what you consume. You shouldn't limit. The only foods you should limit are the ones you don't like eating, because realistically, if you like eating it, you should eat it. There's no reason why you shouldn't. I forgot the second thing. Okay, but yeah, don't get too hung up on sort of the inflammation. It's just something that's worth noting. Yes. Also, fat is also really important for regulating females' menstrual cycles. Or if you have a significantly lower level of body fat, then one of the things that might disappear is your ovulation cycle. So you might find that you have either irregularity or your periods completely cease. So that's something you see it a lot in bodybuilding competitors, where they get to an extremely low level of body fat. So we're talking sub 8%. It's really, really hard to achieve. So if these people are starving themselves, it's not a healthy weight or body fat to maintain. So that might be something else that is necessary. Body fat is necessary to help maintain. Okay? Wonderful.
Jim,
Yes.
I generally like the standard body fat for women is higher than men.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly it. And you'll find that the fat distribution for females is slightly different to males. So females, typically fat distribution is sort of hips and waist. Males is sort of waist and lower back. And this is so when we date it back through evolution, this is for childbirth and child carrying. Okay? So we're going to split off into just sort of groups of 3 or 4. Don't need to worry about where you are. Just turn around facing some group of people. We're going to list as many single source foods as possible. So if you've got someone with a piece of paper or with a laptop, yes, Alberto, good man. Alternatively, use your phone. So a single source. I want you to think about, we're going to have 3 minutes. I want you to list as many high protein sources of food as possible to start off with, and then we're going to go 3 minutes for carbohydrates and 3 minutes for fats. So first one, proteins, go. So single source proteins only. Grab yourself a box, and if you just jump in behind Pel and Lola, jump into this. We're just going through listing group foods that are high in protein at the minute. Just jump in there, get a box in, just sit behind there. Grab a box from there, that's it. Reeled off.
Those guys just said eggs as well. Has anyone else not got eggs? Because I've heard 3 people say it really loudly. Eggs. Good eggs, yes,
We'll go through it.
Right guys, I would like you now to think about carbohydrate-rich foods. So foods that are rich in carbohydrates. Eclairs, pastries, chocolates, bread, rice, all of the good. Everything. Be as specific as possible, guys. List as many as you can. Don't just list bread, list types of bread. Don't feel limited to white and granary. Whole grain, tiger bread. Sourdough. Bacon. Patatas bravas. Excellent. If you think you've exhausted that list, let's move on to fats, please, guys. Foods that are very high in fats. Have you moved on to fats? I did say move on to fats. I did definitely did. Anybody else hear me say move on to fats? Yes, yes. This biscuit sweets, very controversial. Fats. Or would you say they're fats or sugar? Not necessarily. Having just gone through that, would you say they've got the same kind of fat? Yeah, they can do with an overconsumption. So this is why we're going through this, and we're looking at all I want to know is anything that's high in carbohydrates, high in fats. We'll go through that all in a minute where it all comes in. Last 60 seconds then, guys. Yes. Right then, guys, let's have a turn back around for me, please. Diana, you don't need to win, it's okay. Turn yourself around.
We're winning it.
We've got 20 chicken proteins. Yes.
You're competitive.
Everything is, this isn't a competition, but it is a
She wants to try. price. He's asking for a price.
That doesn't surprise me. Michael!
Stop cheating. Always.
Right. So, let's go through a list of proteins. Shout them out. Chicken, yes. Fish.
Beans.
Chickpeas, beans, yes. Eggs. Tofu. Whey. Yeah, whey. Soya. Prawns. Lentils. Eggs, yeah. Salmon. Part of fish. Protein. But yes, salmon. What was the other one? Sorry? Cheese. High in protein, yes.
Would you go like seeded bread? You don't need the bread element there.
Seeds, yeah, seeds of seeds. Yeah. Yeah, they're high in protein, yeah. Anything else? Anything slightly more obscure that people thought of? Or query? Quinoa? Yeah. Okay. Anything else people thought of, or there was quest? Couscous? Nuts? Okay.
Greek yogurt.
Greek yogurt? Yeah, absolutely. Cottage cheese? Different variants of cheese, any variant of cheese. Yeah? Any just sort of raised any eyebrows in your groups or anything? Any got a few questions? Or is it all, everyone is generally in agreement?
Broccoli.
Broccoli. Broccoli is high in protein in its breakdown, however, we'll go through that in a minute. We wouldn't necessarily count that as protein. Okay? So, nuts. Who else thinks nuts are high in protein? Nuts? Anybody? Yes? Yeah? Yeah?
You just lost one.
No. In terms of nuts, in terms of their macronutrient breakdown, you need to consume a significant number of, or a significant volume in order to get a good amount of protein, but they're also extremely high in fats. So I would not use beans, say, beans are good, yes, wouldn't necessarily use nuts as a protein source. Okay, that would be, I would push that into a fat. Yeah? Okay?
So if you get the people that are on a vegan diet then, most of those things you mentioned don't actually...
So beans, pulses, soya, tofu, they can also, I think, yeah, because corn is a
You've
fungus.
just got to eat a high volume of them.
Yes, so people who are on vegetarian or vegan diets typically will have a diet higher in carbohydrates as well, because a lot of their high protein sources are also high carbohydrate sources. So yeah, you can vegetarians obviously can consume dairy, so they can get stuff, cheese, any form of that Greek yogurt, quark as well. There's like a soft cheese.
Yeah.
But then vegans are obviously more limited for whatever reason. So they have to go down to chickpeas, beans, pulses, soya and tofu they can also use, and they can consume corn as well because that's a fungus. It's mycoprotein, so it's not actually a plant-based product. But yeah, typically that means that their diet will be higher in carbohydrates than as well. Whereas people who are omnivores can consume higher, the proportion of the ratio of protein to carbohydrates and fats in products, the meat products is typically significantly higher, so we can consume more protein with less carbohydrates and fats. Yeah.
Jeremy, why is Greek yogurt high in protein?
It's just Greek yogurt. It's just the way it's produced. It's typically you get the way it's strained or made compared to other yogurts where they add in more fruits and syrups and sugars to make it a little more flavourful. Whereas Greek yogurt often is very often put out in just a single form. So it's not necessarily that Greek yogurt with a compote is compote or compote. With a compote, obviously adds a bit there, the ratio then comes down.
If you buy the more sensitive,
Yeah.
unfortunately, they're not less high in protein. So they take fat out, the protein also comes off.
Yeah.
And do you know that gooey bit on top that everyone calls away is the way?
Yeah.
That you should mix in
Yes.
actual protein.
Okay.
Where does milk fall in terms of makeup?
So milk is one of 3 complete foods. So it's all across the board.
What about mushrooms?
What about them? I always say there are no stupid questions.
You're cheating now.
Again, we'll come to this in a bit. So vegetables, I don't really count them as anything. It's just purely because, let's say we've got protein in, broccoli, for example. Proportionally, its macronutrient makeup is slightly higher in protein, but actually, when you're consuming 500 grams to get a portion of protein, you go away, eat 500 grams of broccoli, and tell me how you feel. But it's just, again, we'll come to food volume a little bit later on. But that's, yeah. Okay, so carbohydrates, shout some. Let's go. Everyone, yes. Pasta. Beer, yes. Beer is carbohydrates in beer, but alcohol is slightly different. Fruit, yes. Wine, again, the alcohol is slightly different, yes. Rice, yes. Quinoa, yes. Gnocchi, little potato-based dumplings that are delicious in a cream sauce. Bananas, yeah. Vegetables, yeah. Bread. Pasta. Paella is a make-up of food. It's not just yours. What have I got in my cabinet? Everything. In it goes. Pizza. Again. Yeah, okay. No. Okay. Sweets, yes. Yeah. And sugar-filled, yeah. So full, when they say full fat fizz drinks, they're not full fat, they're sugar-based drinks. Yeah. Yes. Oats, yes. Oats and carbs. Anything else? Cake? Flour, yes. Yeah.
Where would you put peanut butter? Would that be on fat and flour?
Higher fat. Yes, fat. Okay. Excellent. So we've all gone through that. Everyone's quite happy with carbohydrates. Wonderful. And then fats. Nuts. Yes, good. Avocado, butter. Oils. Cheese.
Lard. All the whole flour.
Lard.
Lard, yes. Eggs.
You can leave now.
Higher protein.
Same in the car.
Cream. Yes. Anyone else? Any more? No. Pardon? Mayonnaise? Fun? Egg? Why would we put eggs in protein rather than fats? If you went egg whites, that's solely protein. But anyone who takes egg yolks out of eggs shouldn't be just. Then just use the egg yolks for egg. So we've got 3. So in your groups now, you should have 3 very clear groups of foods that we can start to actually make up meals from, but also start to understand how we make up our macronutrients and where that goes into our food. Okay? So let's put that to one side. We'll come back to that. The next thing we are going to go on to, we're just going to touch on sleep quickly, okay? Off we go. Alright, so sleep. Madam?
What's that?
Say, have a quick nap.
Yeah.
Siesta? This is about siesta time, isn't it, Alberto?
Yeah.
Siesta time?
No, it's too early.
It's midday.
It's 2 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock. Wait for like 2
Right. So, come back to those.
Oh, come on, we can sleep at any time.
Sleep. You have anyone have any idea why sleep is so important when it comes to nutrition? So yeah, sleep is when we recover and we repair. I'm thinking more to do with appetite. So you digest your sleep as well? Yes? Yeah. So sleep allows you to. So we have two hormones that are pretty much responsible for regulating hunger. We have ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin and leptin. So when ghrelin is high, we're hungry. Okay. When leptin is high, that typically is telling us that we don't need to eat. Okay. Now, it's studies recently, well, certainly more recently now, started to link poor sleep quality or shorter sleep with an increase in ghrelin levels, and also the inability to regulate your appetite correctly with leptin. So not only if you sleep less hours during the night, does that give you a bigger window to eat food? Yeah, it's true, it's absolutely true. You sleep 4 hours, that's 20 hours to start eating. Yeah, but also it then means that in terms of these hormones, it becomes more difficult for you to regulate your hunger and acknowledge that sort of satiety, so when you're full. Okay, it's we won't go sort of too heavily into it, but that's the basics of it there. I think that's exactly, yes, good. One. Obviously that is a correlation rather than causation, but if you can't regulate your sleep, this leads to inability to regulate these hormones, bigger opial eating window, more accessibility or increased accessibility to foods, particularly in Western society, can lead to an overconsumption and an increase in overconsumption of calories and increase in body fat because we don't require that. Yeah. Cool. So, last little bit, I think, are people okay? Okay, yeah, sweet, we'll keep going. Keep going. Harris-Benedict formula. Okay. Did everyone get down earlier on? Well, everyone understands calories? Yes. Yeah, wonderful. So Harris-Benedict formula is what we use to calculate our basal metabolic rate. Our basal metabolic rate is the minimum calories we have to take on board in order to function daily. That's it. So your height, your weight, your body composition, how you are now, this is what is going to work out, and that's going to be your calories that you require to take on board. Okay? So, for men, you need to take your BMR. And I would like, just as an activity, I would like everybody to do this, please. So if you get your phone or whatever. So, men, you're going to take your 10, so you're going to do 10 times your weight in kilograms plus 6.25 times your height in centimeters minus 5 times your age plus 5, and then ladies, so your first part's the same, 10 times your weight in kilograms plus 6.25 times by your height in centimeters. You're then going to minus, so your age, say 5 times your age, minus 161. So minus 5 times your age, yeah. So height in centimeters.
Minus 161.
Aging. So the first 3 bits are the same. 10 times your weight in kilograms plus 6.25 times your height in centimeters minus 5 times your age, and then for males we add 5, for ladies we take away 161. Yeah, so if you've got an iPhone, if you turn it sideways, you get a scientific calculator. What? Mind blown, right? That's literally, if you walk out there with nothing else today. Okay? Yes, 5 times rate, yes.
It's almost like the trade coach who's got me on my parody.
Yeah, mate. It's almost like I try and do this.
Join the dots now, mate.
Yes.
What's
Yes, so yeah. So ladies, you take away 161. Gents, you add 5. Alberta has just Googled basal metabolic rates. Calculator.
Calculated on that.
So we'll go through it. Further down, I'll start talking about fuel. Just where it gets really interesting. So whether the calorie representation of 2,000 for ladies, 2,500 for men. 100% true. That's true again. It's 100% true. Guys, daily, recommended daily allowance is 2,000, 2,500. All of them. All of them. Right. Does everybody have that figure, or are people sort of there or thereabouts? Yeah? Excellent. I'm going to start to upset you all even more. Because, obviously, with all mathematics where there's different factors that are variable, there is room for error. So, gents, your plus or minus, so this number is then plus or minus 213 calories. Listen, I lift heavy things, I don't do on my okay? And then ladies, yours is plus or minus 201 calories. So that means it could be either way. Your basal metabolic rate could be that number plus 201 or that number minus 201.
Jamie, if you're younger, that's going to...
Age does impact it, but then also take age into account here.
Because when you're younger, you take on more calories, won't you? And when you're older, but using that method, because your age is involved, you're going to generally, and you're most probably weighing heavier anyway, you're going to come out with quite high.
But all this is just for, this is just to your daily function, it's nothing else yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so come on to that, this is just for you to exist on a day-to-day basis, like without doing anything else. Okay, so yeah, but yes.
But a man who's 20 years younger than me is going to come out with a smaller number. It doesn't surely let me take on more calories.
Minus 5 times rate.
Yeah.
So this and this take into account 5 times rate actually is not that much different. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Has everyone got that down? So everyone's got that number there, or people still figuring out the scientific and the normal?
You did it, but that's all I think about it.
Yeah. Enjoy that.
It's like the calculator, if you don't know what's in it, it's like you science.
Wonderful. So, we then have further caveats to this, guys. So females, when you're going through your monthly cycle, due to increased levels of progesterone, as the week coming up to your cycle, this can increase your hunger. It doesn't necessarily increase your requirement. So your hunger goes up, but your requirement doesn't change. And then when you come on, your hunger levels go back to normal. So this might be why you start to feel hungrier towards the time of, when you come on. If you are breastfeeding, then you can increase your calorie intake by between 200 to 300 calories.
Doesn't mean anything to me.
Oh, congratulations.
James, do none of our business. Okay. Wonderful. Right. Not the breastfeeding, just. Right. So Harris Benedict formula done. Come on. There we go. So has everyone got a figure? Everyone got a figure? Yeah? Sweet. So that is your number of calories you then require to survive. The next part is where we start to take on board activity levels. So our total daily energy expenditure is what we are now going to calculate. This will vary again from person to person. Don't remember those plus or minus 213, plus or minus 201. But you then take that number, so you take your BMR, and if you are sedentary, you times it by 1.2. So sedentary means you do nothing. Okay? You sit down and work, you sit down at home, your activity level is very, very minimal. You are lightly active 1 to 3 times a week. You then times that. If you're lightly active 1 to 3 times a week, you times it by 1.375. Okay? Wait before we go through if any of you are adding that in. 3 to 5 days of moderately to intense activity, we times it by 1.55. I'll come this side so I can actually write. 6 to 7 days a week of intense activity, 1.725. And then if you have an active job and it's 7 days a week activity plus job, you times it by 1.9. Okay? So, leaving.
What was 1.2, sorry?
1.2 is sedentary.
Sitting down doing nothing. You sleep all day basically.
But still, I can put 1.2.
Yeah, if you really want. Or you could get off your arse and do something.
Yeah. So I
You
would
do
I would
1.2,
three
yeah.
classes typically sit on the intense side. Yeah. Yeah. So you were doing that plus walking the dog. So I would probably put you around here.
Yeah.
Again, there is some. So this still isn't an exact number, guys. Tom. Active job is an active job. Right? If you're outside, anything that elevates your heart rate as an active job. So if you're on your feet. So again, typically police, most frontline NHS staff, fire, outdoor jobs, building. I've got an active job. Well, my job is predominantly active. Depends what part of the police. Depends what part of the police.
No part.
Yeah. Okay. Like I say, guys, remember this isn't an exact science. This gives you an indicator to work with because we've already got that room for error when we take our basal metabolic rate and then times it by these numbers. You've still got an even bigger room for error. So if you choose to measure macronutrients or weigh your foods as a method for fat loss, muscle gain, performance, whatever we choose to use it for in terms of our diet, then you need to track it and take markers so that you can notice if you are going against the trend of what you want to achieve. So if you want to lose weight and we're tracking calories and you're not seeing a change, then obviously those calories, you're not in a deficit. We'll talk to you again later. Okay? If you are looking for build lean muscle tissue or you're looking to increase your body weight and you're consuming calories and your body weight isn't changing, then obviously you need to increase that calorie intake even more. It isn't an exact science. It does require room to play. Yeah. That's where things are wrong. People are like, put this in. I'm not losing weight. This is exactly what I said. No, we still need to look at it and adjust it. Okay?
How long do you suggest like staying in before like right this isn't working?
I would generally give so obviously when we work together one-on-one, I would give 2 to 3 weeks of consistently tracking and making sure that you've got 2 to 3 solid weeks of evidence. And if there's been no change and you've hit your macros, there's been no change to your training, no change to your daily activity, then I would look at making a change. But unless there's a factor in that that's changed, that you've gone from a job that's sedentary to active or active to sedentary, or you've not trained because life's been busy, then
Yeah,
it's got to be 2 to 3 consistent weeks before we start to adjust anything.
Are there things like you just shouldn't eat as well?
Stuff you don't like or stuff you're allergic to.
Okay, you say that.
Yeah.
Jamie, sorry, is it true that one thing we want to hear about all the time?
Yeah.
There's a point where if you're trying to reduce your calories so you lose weight,
Yes.
is there a point where you can be eating like too few calories? Do you have to eat this? Is there like a minimum amount per day that you need to eat, or really is it just the less you eat?
Stuff that supports energy levels but doesn't, but not excess body fat.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're consuming calories and you're not losing weight, then you're not in a calorie deficit.
No.
Yeah, that's essentially it.
But it's more, is there like a minimum you should go down to before it becomes a problem?
I would never, personally, I would never work with someone and give them less than sort of 14 or 1500 calories a day. Personally, from like one-to-one coaching, some people, like there's I know Cambridge Diet. If you go onto any of the shakes, they have you on like less than 1,000 calories a day. And in some cases where you've got people who are morbidly obese, or they are looking to go onto gastric bands or gastric bypass surgery, then there's dietitian guided diets where they will have them on that to get them to lose weight so that they can prepare them for surgery so that it becomes safe, or they've got to lose a significant amount of weight. So it depends from person to person, but essentially as long as it like that's something like that isn't sustainable.
Yeah.
Because it's a big part about sustainability. But if someone ever came in here and they said, oh, if someone ever comes in here on a juice fast, I'll send them home because it's not safe. Fundamentally, you're not consuming enough to support energy level, to support your activity levels. But yeah, so it varies person to person. If you're managed, if there's a specific medical reason that it needs to go super low and it's managed by a dietitian or a medical team, then that's by those guys. But for me personally, that would be a number I'd be comfortable prescribing. Cool. Okay? Everybody got a number from that one? Sweet. So that is one way to start tracking. If you're comfortable tracking calories and you're happy tracking calories, calories can be a great way to increase your lean muscle tissue, lose fat. They're a fantastic tool to help improve your overall nutrition knowledge and your day-to-day life. Ultimately, the goal is to stop tracking calories and to be able to eat sustainably and have a working knowledge of food. But it's a fantastic tool to understand how much food actually you should be taking on board and where you need to be looking at and how much could be too much or how much isn't enough when we're going with those. What we got there? So your total daily energy expenditure. You've got your BMR makes up 60%. Stop laughing and be writing. I can't write. You've then got the thermic effect of food, 10%. So this already, the thermic effect of food, you've got some sort of control over, but this is 70% of your total daily energy expenditure. So this leaves 30% as activity-related thermogenesis or activity-related energy expenditure. How much do we think a workout contributes to this? 50%. So that would be 50% of this, so 15. Yeah. Anything else? What? Oh, sorry. No, so like a workout. So that if you did team one.
I was just at 50%. I was going over the 30% as a
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you meant like that. Sorry.
I think it's going to be depressingly low now.
I'm going with like
5%. Typically, an hour's workout contributes to about 5% of your total daily energy expenditure, over and above what you would ordinarily expend in that hour. So say we've got this will test maths out, right? So 24 hours in a day, that means 1 hour is 4%, right? Okay, you've got 2,500 calories, so 1% is 25, 50, 125 calories, 100 calories in that. Okay? Yeah? Okay? My math is also wrong. So, say you burn, let's go. Say you burn 400 calories in an hour. Yeah? Just an example. As your heart rate is then going to be elevated to whatever number, so you average 130 heart rate over an hour. Warm up, strength, session, cool down. You burn between another 300 to 400 calories over and on top of what you already burned. So although it says you burn 800 calories in that session, actually you've only burned another 400. Which is why the percentage is less. It accounts for less than you think. One of the reasons why we don't, or you shouldn't count your calories burned towards your calories consumed. You work off of the calories that we've just worked out there, because that's going to give you what you need.
Do you mind me asking what the 5% is?
Pardon?
Do you mind me asking what
The 5% is, that's your exercise related activity.
Okay.
So the other 25%, so if you do double session, then you can probably bolster that up to about 10%. But between 5 and 10% of your total daily energy expenditure comes from activity. 20 to 25% then comes from your non-exercise related activity. So anything outside of here, or that isn't going for a run. So if you're walking from A to B, your step count, this is where you can start to make some serious impact on your calories burned. It's one of the things why people use step counts to burn as a goal for burning fat, because it increases your non-exercise related. If you can increase that, your calories burned over those 20 to 25%, that's a big, big increase. Get a dog. Okay. So that, any questions in relation to that? No, sweet. That's essentially, if you are looking for fat loss, don't rely on additionally coming to the gym. It needs to be a big picture. Sorry, what's the question?
I was going to say, why is it so low? Like, why do people think, obviously you assume that that's like the best way, right? But it's clearly a lot less than we thought. Why is it so low?
Because it's, you get, like I say, you're still going to burn calories in that hour anyway. So you're going to, you're still alive in that hour. Just. But you're still, your metabolic rate, so this is your metabolic rate here. When we come to, there's ways you can elevate your base metabolic rate in terms of body composition, lowering your body fat, increasing your lean body muscle, because they're active cells rather than inactive cells. So we can increase that through strength and resistance training. So this is your timeline. Say you're doing a 12:30 class. You come to 12:30, you exercise, your metabolic rate increases for this period of time here, then starts to drop again. Comes back in. So this is the time when actually these are the only additional calories you've actually done.
Only 4%. It's only 4%.
Yeah, 4% of your day, and ordinarily you'd still be at this level. Yeah. Okay. So in other words, he's got his hand up, not anyone there.
Jamie, is there a better time to train in the day? Is there...
The time suits you.
It's just, it doesn't matter what time.
Absolutely.
we
Typically,
right.
if you are, you could potentially be stronger later on in the day than you are earlier in the morning. It depends on if you've eaten, depending on glycogen source, if it's been depleted. There's so many factors, but that wouldn't be the thing I would look to make a massive impact. Some people feel better training at certain times of the day than others, but that's very subjective rather than there is a best time to train during the day. Yeah.
What's your view on eating?
Pardon?
What's your view on eating? You may when you stop eating after 6 and all that stuff in the evening.
It's complete bollocks.
I know. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. I eat all of the food.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what time you eat, you're eating calories.
No, so in terms of this, there's obviously, people have heard if you eat carbohydrates after 6, they're stored as fat. Yeah? I believed that when I first started out a long time ago, and actually did it and lost weight because I cut calories. So obviously you're cutting out carbohydrates in one meal if you're eating after 6 o'clock. When you store carbs, so with every gram of carbohydrate you store, so muscle glycogen, you store 3 grams of water. We know that we can store up to 600, or on average 600 grams of carbohydrates. Add another, so 1800 grams. Cut out all of that, it's 2.5 kilos you've just lost. Very quickly, because you're depleting glycogen stores late at night, so you're no longer requiring those. So instantly, you see that really, really fast fat loss, or weight loss. But then it's stalled because you haven't changed anything else. So that's why we see people stagnate. So they get that initial weight loss, they think, oh, I cut out carbs, I'm going to lose that. And it's awesome straight away, but then it stops because all you've done is just cut out a little bit of carbohydrate last thing.
Do you think you should eat carbs during the day and then have just like a meat and veg kind of meal at night?
It depends from person to person. Again, there's carbohydrates later on at night can actually help people sleep better. There's also foods high in tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonin, which is a precursor to melatonin, which helps you get into a sleep cycle. So turkeys are quite high in tryptophan.
That's why you sleep at Christmas.
Alongside the copious amounts of alcohol. Which is why I know that, yeah. So it depends, again, it's very, very individual based. If you feel that you can tolerate a meal that's higher in carbohydrates later on at night, and it fits into your calorie requirement, like, that's fine. If actually, do you know what, I don't feel good going to bed on a meal that's heavy in carbs, I'd rather just have a load of veg, a little bit of fat, and a nice decent portion of protein, then it's very much what works for the individual.
Also, is there a particular time, like how long you're meant to eat between each eating session?
Whenever you can.
It's
like all we have. So this it's just all like it's constant. Like I don't get the space, the time. What do you mean?
Okay.
Yeah. No. So in terms of this, so if we go back to our calorie requirements. So we've got 2,500 calories. You could literally consume all of your calories in one meal throughout the day. So this is 6 a.m. when you wake up. This is 10 p.m. when you go to bed. So you could consume 2,500 calories there and still stay the same way. You could consume them in 3 meals across a day, equally spaced apart. If you're working odd hours, so for some people who work shifts, obviously their meal times are dictated, so they've got no other choice. For some people people that work here, we're coaching classes in the morning. My first meal actually is the same meal, like first meal at 5 o'clock, and then I'll have something after, and then I'll have something again before lunch, and then I'll have something after lunch, and then I'll have something after, and then I get home. Yeah?
But can the body only store a certain amount of like energy before it's like you're basically eating for the sake of eating?
Yeah, that. Yeah, so once you overconsume your calories that over your daily requirement, you will then start to store that as body fat. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what time, it doesn't, in terms of the absorption of food, there's some debate as to how much protein you can absorb in a sitting. This varies from person to person. But so in terms of nutrient timing, that's something potentially to look into, but that's really top 1%.
Yeah.
Like, if less than that, top 0.01% in terms of the timings of your food. People here, with all due respect, unless any of you are hiding it really well, we are not elite athletes. Okay? I know, I'm sorry. Surprise to some of you. Yeah, it's my bobsleighing career up in shreds. So, in terms of nutrient timing, a lot of people here are balancing training with work with family commitments. So we need to eat when we can. So actually, getting our calorie requirement in first, and again we'll come to this a little bit later on, calorie requirement first, and then making sure we've got adequate protein intake to support our recovery from training is going to put us in a far better position than going, oh well actually I need to eat 3 hours apart because it means I can absorb more protein because everything. There is a peak protein time, so you can absorb as much like your time you take on protein. But that's, again, top 1%. We don't need to be worried about that. We need to be worried about making sure we consume enough calories that support activity levels, but not additional body fat.
Does body shape, so that the BMR, does that take into account whether you're ectomorph, mesomorph?
That's, so ectomorph, mesomorph, endomorph is it's now been researched on that it's very outdated form thinking. Actually, it's still very independent from person to person. You might have everyone's got slightly longer limbs, slightly shorter torso, again, everyone's body is different. People store body fat in different ways. Some people are going to mobilise body fat from certain areas first. So this is why you can't spot target or spot reduce fat. Yes, exactly that. You just got to sustain a calorie deficit long enough in order to burn fat to achieve where you want to get to, if you want to burn fat. But yes, no, it doesn't. Like I say, men, typically, the last place it will go from men will be waist and lower back. The last place from women, upper thighs and waist. Typically. Okay. Cool. Any other questions? Anyone? Yeah, G.
Why is Mark Wahlberg telling me to train at 2 a.m.?
Right, this is interesting.
He's in America, there's a time difference.
Mark Wahlberg, what time do you go to bed at 7 o'clock? He goes to bed at 7 o'clock, doesn't he? Yeah. Set around that sort of time, right? So here we go. So Mark Wahlberg, he's got a ridiculous schedule, right? But so he wakes up at 2, he trains his first session at 3 a.m. So he wake up, say 2 a.m, he goes to bed at 7 p.m. Yeah? First of all, what's the difference, what's the time frame from 7 back round to 2? 7 hours. Who here gets 7 hours sleep regularly?
Yeah.
Honestly? Yeah, exactly. So that's 7 hours sleep. That's a good amount of sleep. It fits in around his family. So he can then get a session in here. He can then eat. He then does he meditates, does whatever he does. He then gets his second session in here, and this is all before sort of 7:30, 8 a.m. So he's now got breakfast with his kids. He then does all this stuff with Wahlburgers, he goes and plays a round of golf, he then does whatever he wants, he then gets to pick his kids up from school at 3 p.m. That evening there is with his kids. So, and then he goes to bed.
Sounds like Alan, doesn't it?
Okay, so that there
Not the other weekend, mate.
is a schedule that works for him. He's got, admittedly, he's got trainers that he's paying through the nose. He's not necessarily having to worry about his nutrition because he's got funds and finances to put that aside and pay for that. But he's still getting 7 hours sleep. He's getting his training in. He's got his family time. He's got his business time. That's all allocated there. It's just because training at 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning works for him. It's not like it's the best time. He still gets his 7 hours sleep. So actually, when you look at it, like if you go to bed at 10:30 and wake up at 6:30, yeah, exactly, that's it.
Well, it's pretty much balance.
Yeah.
That's why he gets 5 hours in 6. But you pay 2 8 now 4 hours.
Right. So, fat loss. First of all, is everyone okay to carry on? Does anybody need to go grab coffees? We obviously separate, not at the same time. If you need to go, should we go? Let's have a 5-minute break. Switch off. Grab a coffee. If anybody needs to go for a quick walk, just before we jump into fat loss, stand up, move around.